Shabbat Shalom. And it is a special Shabbat indeed. It says so on the cover of your handout. What is the special term for this Shabbat? Shabbat Hagadol. And why is it the Gadol? Why is it the big Shabbat? Well, actually, yes. So, historically, and by historically I mean more than a couple hundred years ago, rabbis did not give weekly sermons. They did not do that. That was something that was adopted through the early Reform movement in Germany from our Christian neighbors and caught on because people found that they actually liked hearing the rabbi. Well, that may or may not be, but that at least was the theory, and certainly rabbis found that they liked having a captive audience. Prior to that, rabbis did not give sermons every week, but they would occasionally do extended teachings. And this was one of them. Shabbat Hagadol was big because the rabbi would give a big talk, and that big talk would be about Pesach. Now, it wasn't about the themes and the feeling of Pesach. It wasn't about the spirit of Pesach, although all of those things would have been included tangentially. Primarily, this was the moment when the rabbi would give everybody their annual review of how to prepare for Pesach. Because we need to remind ourselves what counts as chametz, what is not chametz. What do we need to clean? Where do we not need to clean? What are we going to get for our maror, our bitter herbs? What do we not use for maror, our bitter herbs? And the rabbi would spend this time on Shabbat making sure everybody had all of those details. But that seems to have a bit of a problem involved. I mean, it's Shabbat. When's Pesach? Yeah, just in a couple days. So if I'm giving you all of the information you need to clean and prepare and gather and all of that, you don't have enough time, right? I mean, who has time to clean their house for Pesach if they're going to begin tomorrow rather than beginning last week? Who's going to have time to make sure they can run to the various stores that have the different Pesach products scattered around Orlando to make sure they can find their favorite fruit slices here and the gefilte fish that has the right type over here, and they need to get a roast, and that's only available in that Winn-Dixie. I mean, I think my wife and I have already spent at least, about 10 hours over the last couple weeks procuring things, and that doesn't count how much preparation we've already done of winding down the pantry so that we don't have too much chametz left over to be disposed of. And it doesn't count in all of the preparations for the other elements of the Seder. Honestly, if you're only now finding out that Passover is starting in a couple days, all I've done is make you really, really anxious and probably not given you enough time to do anything about it. But that is where we can see through the lens of history, not just that things were different, but that because they were different, they felt different. So let's defend our ancestors, and then we'll attack ourselves a little bit later on. So our ancestors were not fools for having Shabbat Hagadol be this close to the holiday of Pesach. They were no dummies. Instead, let us try and understand, what did Pesach look 500, 600, 700 years ago? We'll use that as a benchmark. It is after the temple has been destroyed, the Seder has already been very well formalized. It would look very similar in terms of the liturgy and the activities as ours, and yet it would be radically different. So what did the average house look like 600, 700 years ago? How many square feet you thinking? Right? Few thousand? No, absolutely not. How many rooms do you think the average house would have had? Yeah, one or two. That was it. What we would call a shack or the shed in the backyard, that was their house. Right? Because, well, what were you going to put in your house? You didn't have a TV. You didn't have a sofa. You didn't have a refrigerator. You didn't have a giant oven, a dining room table, and all of those things. I mean, some people did, certainly, but the people who did also had servants, and that made it much more manageable if they did need to do anything with it. Most people had a couple of rooms. That was it. And the cleaning of those rooms, well, it's simple. You take maybe the couple chairs you've got, you wipe them off. You have the little bit of wood that you use as your table. You brush that down. and bada bing, bada boom, you're done. All right, you've only got a handful of pots and pans, maybe a few plates or wooden troughs that each person uses. You prepare those quite simply, maybe take you half an hour to get that ready and done, and your Passover cleaning is finished. It's not like you have to go searching throughout a dozen rooms looking for your chametz, because you don't have a dozen rooms in which to eat the chametz in the first place. And it's not like you have chametz sitting around on shelves. How would you eat on an average day, not Passover day, on an average day 500, 600 years ago? What would you do? All right, give me your cooking schedule. Give me you're going down to the supermarket? No. All right, so what did life look like? This matters. This matters not just because of historical curiosity. Deborah, you're a cooker, or a baker, and cook. Yeah, you'd hang something over a fire. You'd throw in some water and some various ingredients, usually going to be vegetables, not a whole lot of meat going around. And yeah, then you'd also mix up some bread. And the bread was great because you could put the flour and the water together and you'd leave it and let it rise. And then when it was ready to be eaten, you'd throw it in the oven, maybe a communal oven, maybe you had your own. And then it would get nice and then you would eat. Every day. If you wanted to eat, you made what you were going to eat every day. There was no fridge. There were no canned goods. There was no deep freeze. What you had was what you had. And there were some preservatives, namely salt, in order to make things last longer. But by and large, what you ate was what you made. And what you made happened that day. That means you didn't have a bunch of chametz just sitting in your cupboard that needed to be managed and worked through in order that you didn't waste anything. What was in my cupboard? Raw ingredients. There were beans, there was flour, there was maybe some dried tomato, well, not 500, 600 years ago. There would have been other dried vegetables maybe, and you know, a few things that I'd taken from the garden that were able to keep. That was it. And that means there was much less to prepare or remove or get rid of for your Passover preparation. But you do need a couple things. You need maror. You need a bitter herb. Now, do you need to drive to the supermarket to find your bitter herb, to find the exact variety that you're going to use this year? No, where did you find your maror? Your garden. Right, somewhere in the back. You were growing all sorts of vegetables, and one of them would be a bitter leafy green. And if you didn't have it in your garden, then you just walk into the forest and you'd grab a plant that you knew was safe because you knew those sorts of things, and boom, you were done. You were done, and you were ready. So it would take probably about a day to get ready for Passover. Remember, you're also making your own matzah. And you'd make your own matzah throughout the holiday of Pesach, because you didn't have giant boxes of manischewitz that was ready-made from a factory. You were making your own. So what would your meal look like during Pesach? Did you have the potato starch egg noodle substitute for your pasta? No. You ate basically the same thing during Pesach as what you ate not during Pesach. Yes, your bread was now matzah rather than puffy, and there would be, depending upon which part of Europe you might have been in, some restrictions on using certain bean products or not, depending upon the time and the location. But you were eating your vegetables and fruits, and you were making your matzah on the fly, and if you caught a fish, you could eat some fish. Maybe you were in the luxury and able to have a few birds. You actually had a little bit of meat that you could also have from a lamb or from a cow if you were very, very well off. But your meals would not look fundamentally different during Pesach than they did during the rest of the year. And so you didn't need to load up 3 shopping carts to get all of the things you would need to have Passover. You would, in fact, go about your life very, very similarly to how you would do. You would have more holidays, because you would have that first and second day off, and you wouldn't be working during that. You'd come to services, and you would be having meals with your friends and your families. And then throughout the holiday, Chol HaMoed, there would be a special jubilant atmosphere as we had additional prayers, most notably Hallel during our service. And so there'd be a lot more singing, a lot more conviviality for everybody. And that would, of course, then culminate in the last 2 days of the holiday as well, being holidays, where we weren't at our trades and instead were joining together for services and celebration. So really, it was kind of like a vacation week. Most everything was easier during Passover rather than harder. And yet, when I talk to people who take Passover seriously in the 21st century, it is a tircha, it is a burden to them. It is something that they don't look forward to, because Passover means bloody knuckles from scrubbing underneath the refrigerator. Passover means hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars spent on specialty items from overpriced vendors. Passover means just hours and hours or days or weeks of work. I have colleagues that have already been cooking and baking and preparing for Passover for more than a week, because they had to get everything ready that far in advance, because they are expected to have 9 different dishes on that Seder just for the veg, because that's the expectation. And that's the key, the expectation. We have an expectation now because we happen to be living in a consumer society that provides many more opportunities, and with those opportunities has come an expectation that we will avail ourselves of them. I mean, after all, if you can buy all of these kosher for Passover products that look like they might be good, they're usually not, but they look like they might be good, then shouldn't I have them? Shouldn't I get my substitute pasta so that I can pretend like I'm still having spaghetti during Passover? Because after all, we eat spaghetti occasionally. Well, but you don't need to. Just because it's available doesn't mean you have to avail yourself of it. Just because somebody wants to sell it to you doesn't mean you have to be the buyer for that product. And yet we've continued to see a Pesach inflation, not just the inflationary prices, which were quite harsh this year, but inflationary of the expectations. And it's not only on the consumer side in terms of what happens at the checkout. It is also on the consumer side of what happens within our own homes. Our homes are 10 times larger and more complicated than they ever were historically, which means that many people imagine it's 10 times more work. I will remind you again, Passover cleaning is not spring cleaning. Dirt is not chametz. However dirty your floor may be, and I'm making no judgment here, I can guarantee you that unless you've been throwing bread on the ground, there's no chametz there. It might be muddy, it might be dirty, and it might be tracked full of leaves, dead bugs, I don't know what. That's not chametz. If you wanted to clean that up a month before Passover or after Passover. Don't confuse it. You do not need to air all of your linens that have been stuck in the back of the closet since last time you took them out to air them for Pesach. You don't need to go into your storage unit and see if there's something there unless you know that you were eating sandwiches in the midst of your storage unit. We have more things, which has seemed to create more trouble. And this is one of the fundamental traps of our modern life. We imagine ourselves so lucky, and trust me, we are, if only for the bathrooms, so lucky to be living now rather than 500 years ago. And in so many ways we are, but in many ways we have squandered the freedom that we have gained in this time. We have squandered the blessings that we have been showered upon us in this time, and turned our lives into something harder than theirs, and made this holiday of Pesach, which is meant to be a week-long near vacation, into instead a week-long struggle with endless jokes about the bread of affliction. And that second element about the vacation versus non-vacation atmosphere is not only due to how we have organized our homes and how we have changed how we eat, by how we rely on processed foods rather than fresh and things that we prepare for ourselves, or by how many different mixers we need to feel we need in our house. Those, yes, have come with their own problems, but there is another fundamental barrier to all of this, which is, when would you prepare for Pesach? Even if you did enjoy cleaning all 12 rooms, top to bottom, even if you did feel that you wanted to be able to immerse and change every single one of your pots and pans over, even if you're not planning, even if you love the idea of spending 6 hours in the supermarket trying to plan out all the meals with all of the weird substitute products that are on offer, when would you do this? unless you're retired. Because how many of you can just take a day off work? Can just, call the office and say, oh, I can't come in for the next week. Actually, week plus a couple days of prep because it's Passover time. I would be surprised if many of you had that luxury. But our ancestors 500 years ago did. Because they were mostly farmers or tradesmen or merchants. They didn't have a boss. They didn't have a paycheck. When they worked, they grew something. When they worked, they made something. When they worked, they sold something. And if they didn't work, then those things didn't happen. But it wasn't the end of the world. They weren't a paycheck or two away from losing their house. They weren't worried about being fired and replaced by AI and no longer having health insurance. They weren't scrambling just to keep up with the flow of inflation that was constantly crushing them and preventing them from being able to do what they actually want to do. Because one small slip, and you've got a pink slip. Our ancestors were self-employed, and that comes with its own level of fear and terror, absolutely. But it also comes with a freedom that allows you to set that schedule to make Passover a week. That could be a vacation. To tell your clients, it's Passover time. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be busy. I won't be available for the next 10 days because I need to get ready and then we're having the celebration. But I'll be back to you later. We all should have that freedom. We all should have that freedom because this is the holiday of freedom. It is the grand irony of the 21st century that the average person has less freedom over their own schedule now than at any point in our history, save when we were actually slaves. Because most of our life is regimented by forces beyond the individual's control. Or the individual's control if they are willing to take the risk that goes along with it, and it is a big risk indeed, and one that is often simply impossible for many people to take that danger. We have enslaved ourselves into a society that has replaced the idols of Zeus and Baal and Marduk and all of the other ancient gods with the idol of productivity, the idol of efficiency, and the idol that you yourself don't matter, what you contribute matters. You yourself are an expendable resource that can be burnt up like gasoline in order to drive the engine of the economy and to create economic benefit. And you will share in some of that, and that will allow you to, by extension, share with others when you buy your food, when you pay for your house, and when you engage in all the economic activity that we take for granted. But ultimately, you yourself don't matter to this machine. You yourself are simply an input and too often an output. You yourself, yourself is worthless. Your productivity matters, but your soul is meaningless. And as such, I can work you as hard as I possibly can in order to achieve as much productivity as I possibly can. And by doing so, I have served the gods that we bow to in this modern world. And by doing so, we have made Pesach harder than at any point since our slavery. By doing so, we have transformed ourselves. We have allowed ourselves to be ensnared, to be shackled once again into a system that says, you yourself are pointless. The mud bricks you make for me, that's all that matters. And if I want more mud bricks, I'll tell you to get me more mud bricks and I'll whip you in the process. And if you complain, I'll just make your work harder. Judaism fundamentally claimed at the time of the Exodus that that was not what human beings were for. God did not create us to be productive. Yes, we do work. Yes, there is so much that we find meaningful and purposeful and necessary in our life. But to have arranged our life for productivity rather than to have arranged our life to be lived is a fundamental error in the 21st century. And it's one that each of us is not at liberty to change all on our own. And we can continue to advocate for the rights of all to be able to have a dignified life regardless of how they show up on a balance sheet. But we do also have choices individually of how much will I give in to these ideas? How much will I make my Passover about surrounding myself with more products, about engaging with this system as the system wants me to engage, rather than engaging with it as my ancestors did until the modern times? We have that choice still of how are we going to sit at that Seder table. Will I be surrounded by all the new things I bought, or will I be surrounded by my friends and my family? Will I have exhausted myself keeping up with the expectations of others that far outstrip the expectations of God? Or will I allow myself to sit at that Seder table with a modest meal and enjoy the company of my friends and family in freedom rather than in exhaustion? Will I find a way, even if I can't take off from work to come to services, will I get up half an hour earlier and do parts of the service on my own? Or maybe I have the luxury at my office of working with headphones on. Maybe I'll tune in to the website of TI and I'll listen to the service, even if I can't be there in person. I'll hear the songs and feel that celebration. Maybe next year I'll be able to arrange my schedule to give myself a little more time. Or if you're in a position where you are the actual schedule setter, you run your own office, you are answerable to no one else, there are becoming fewer and fewer positions. But if you are, maybe let your staff have the day off and come to shul. Or even if you're not going to come to shul, because I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, although I think I'm speaking to the right crowd when I suggest it. But even if not, I'm going to sit home and I'm going to be free on this day. And I'm going to remember that this is what God said was the natural human condition. Passover is a holiday unlike any other in our calendar because it reminds us of what it is to be human. It reminds us of what it is to yearn to be free. And very much in modern age, we have allowed ourselves to be shackled with chains of gold and silver. And we have allowed ourselves to be bedazzled by all of the shiny things that make life seem more interesting, that make life seem more comfortable, that make life seem more desirable. But golden shackles are still shackles. And a slave in luxury is still a slave. Find the gap through the bars. Allow Passover to give you the opportunity to reflect on how you are currently not as fully free as God wants you to be. And see what you can do. Little perhaps, but still something. To try and find more freedom in the year that's about to begin. Remembering that this is also one of our New Years. We have lots of them in our holiday cycle. This is a time to re-examine how free we are. And right now, the bills don't look so free. But we don't have to accept that. It takes time to break out of that mentality. It took time for our ancestors to accept the promise of freedom that Moses was offering. But we can. We must. We need to be free. There is no other way to be human. Shabbat Shalom and an early Chag Sameach.